Free agency is behind us, but these teams still have a lot of needs. Some major, and some are just some finishing touches on top, like the Philadelphia Eagles. Amir's joining the show. We're going to be going through every single NFL team and what is their biggest need heading into the NFL draft. Amir is joining the show as always on these Thursdays, and it's a stacked Thursday card, by the way. Not only are we getting NFL, I guess a video here for you guys, we have a full NBA slate. We have college basketball Sweet 16 going on tonight, and then also, Amir, the MLP is back. It's a great time to be a sports fan this time of year. First off, your thoughts on how crazy this day is going to be after this?
It's gonna be crazy, man. Very, very crazy, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I mean, my Gators are in the Sweet 16. We look like the most complete team, and Walter Clayton looks like Stephen Curry. So hopefully we can make a deep run at this and relive those mid 2000s, I guess, deep runs in the tournament. But Amir, we're gonna kick it off here with some veterans, some guys that have had lengthy careers, and for Russell Wilson, he's had a Hall of Fame level career. Now, whether he makes it or not, that's a different topic for a different day. I want to ask you, out of these two, of course, Russ signs a short-term deal with the Giants. He's going to be their starter next year. Great mouthpiece for all the young pieces they have going forward. Also, kind of helps some of their young pieces get a feeling of what winning feels like. He's going to help them do that at least better than what they've had as of late. And for Stefon Diggs, coming off a pretty serious knee injury, he's not going to be ready from day number one, but he's going to a team that needed a number one X wide receiver, and they get one in the New England Patriots. Which has the bigger impact for you going into next season?
Honestly, I'm going to lean towards Russ, and the reason why is because the Giants needed a veteran QB in that locker room. They needed somebody to unlock Malik Neighbors even more. Wan'Dale Robinson, who in my opinion has some hidden potential. Jalen Hyatt, who also could, maybe tap into his potential this year. I'm not really sure how much of it, but maybe. You got Tyron Tracy in the backfield, and so this offense has some hidden potential, and I think they need a veteran presence to really unlock it. Daniel Jones really, wasn't it. I think the relationship with him and the Giants were broken. And I think it was perfect for him to leave and move on. And as for Diggs, I mean, he's coming off a serious injury. The Patriots are already sort of trending in the right direction. I mean, I think they signed 3 offensive linemen in this free agency, which is, their dire need. And even though they really need a number one receiver, I mean, I don't really see how much Diggs is going to produce. I mean, we've already seen him decline these past 2 years. And that's coming off an ACL injury. And so, even with him being a number one, I don't really see how much of an impact it's really going to have on that team.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a huge addition for the fact that the talent difference between
Yeah.
Stefon Diggs and whoever else was their number one, Demario Douglas, that's a huge difference. So that impact will be felt. But outside of elevating this offense and taking them to new heights, I think that's just on the shoulders of Drake May's progression. If
Yeah.
he progresses, this offense will progress with it. But again, hey, 2 veterans have signed. All we're waiting now is Mr. Darkness Retreat, Aaron Rodgers. Amir, actually, quick thoughts about that before we go on. How frustrated are you with the situation? I've been like, we both have been kind of defending Aaron Rodgers, saying, take your time, make the decision, the right decision, because it's going to be your last stop. But this is just going on and on and on, and I'm starting to get sick and tired of Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, I mean, he's just dragging it on, and reports come out saying he's asking for like 50 million a year, and it's like, come on, man, it's ridiculous. Like,
Yeah.
I don't understand how you can look at a team like Pittsburgh, look at a team like Minnesota, you see these Super Bowl ready rosters, and you're just going ahead asking for 50 million. If I'm him, I'm focusing on winning. I mean, like you've already made millions of dollars your entire career. Teams aren't going to throw the bank at you, and so now it's like either you're going to retire or you're going to settle for a team that's really slacking in talent. And so, I mean, it's just dragging it on, egging it on, and he's just being dramatic at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he's chosen the money with what that'll come with the Pittsburgh Steelers over a way more talented offensive coaching staff than the Minnesota Vikings. Again, like you said, go there, take 10, 15, 20 million dollars instead of 50. And again, that's a lot of money for him even. But again,
But
what do
you're
you value
40.
more in this at this point in your career? Obviously, it's the money more so than winning. Who knows? Maybe Rodgers just thinks his legacy is, I guess, defined, and another ring wouldn't really elevate his, I guess, GOAT status. We'll just put it that way. But let's get into it here, man. I'm going to go through every single position here and give you guys what I think is either their biggest need or their second biggest need for some of these teams. On your screen, you have three teams in the top three of the draft. The Titans, the Browns, the Giants, in that order, all could use a Cam Ward or Shador Sanders, which, again, they're going to be top 10 picks at the end of the day there in late April. But a team down the board, which could be solved with the Aaron Rodgers addition, even that, I think if the Steelers bring in Aaron Rodgers, they still need a young project that maybe can take over after Aaron Rodgers does retire or moves on from Pittsburgh. These four teams need a quarterback. Amir, any thoughts on these four? You're a Browns fan. Let's focus in on that. If you're the Browns at number two, where do you want to go? To me, I am. I'll tell you in a second, but do you go Cam Ward or Shador Sanders at number two if they're available?
Well, in my opinion, I think as Browns fans are overthinking it. I think if you get Carter at two, we're still going to be in poverty regardless. And so, me personally, I don't think we could develop a guy like Jackson Dart, Ewers, or Kyle McCord. So I'll say grab Shador at two, or hopefully Cam Ward if the Titans, go in the opposite direction. Draft Shador, try to sign a veteran like Kirk Cousins. If he's going to, be willing to sign with the Browns for on a 1 year or a 2 year deal. And sort of have it similar to the Falcons this past year. You had Penix learn from Rodgers, or not Rodgers, but Kirk all throughout the year. Learn from him, develop him. So when he was thrown into that fire, at that point the offense was somewhat grooving, and he's able to adjust on the fly. My biggest issue was like, I don't want to draft the edge rusher at two unless he's like, for sure generational. Unless he's for sure going to come on and be a Myles Garrett impact right away.
Yeah, again, now I will say this kind of with the same rationale and reasoning. The Browns just can't develop quarterbacks, and Shador Sanders is the most accurate quarterback in the class. He might be the best leader in this class, but is he going to elevate the Browns' ceilings with subpar weapons around him? I don't know if he's that guy, and honestly, I don't know if Cleveland can develop any quarterback at this point. Even if we brought in Tom Brady, we probably make him a league average quarterback. But this roster is just not ready to win right now. And to me, I would rather go with a Travis Hunter, an Abdul Carter, for the fact that we re-signed Miles. We saw a couple years ago, Amir, when Miles Garrett won his Defensive Player of the Year, Jadeveon Clowney was a shell of again, I'm adding like three shells here of his prime version there in Houston. So he wasn't his best, but that was enough for Miles Garrett to be a defensive player of the year because he wasn't getting double teamed and triple teamed almost every single play. So I think bringing in Abdul Carter will elevate this defense because both of those guys are athletic freaks and they're going to have one-on-one, matchups almost every single play. But that is why I'm in the camp of an Abdul or Travis Hunter. Outside of that, you have guys like Jackson Dart, who I do like down the board. Let's say a team like Pittsburgh gets involved there in the late first round. Quinn Ewers is a project. Maybe he ends up in Dallas. And Kyle McCord kind of turned his season around and his, Ohio State. Syracuse, and then he elevated their ceiling with all the talented weapons they had there at Syracuse. But these are the quarterback needy teams. Amir, any thoughts about the rest of these teams?
For Pittsburgh, man, like, and I don't understand, where Pittsburgh is going. I completely understand, they need a quarterback, but it's like, you know, I think that their biggest problem in the first place was freaking hiring Arthur Smith. I mean, this offense
Yeah.
isn't going to get elevated much unless they are loaded with talent. They still need a running back badly. I mean, Jalen Warren is good, but you really don't want him taking up all your RB1 reps. And so Pittsburgh has to really find a direction that offensively and schematically where they want to go. Because I think DK and George Pickens is going to be so much tension year one.
Yeah. Yeah, excited to see that duo there, man. A lot of athleticness going on with DK and George Pickens. They're going to be a problem for defensive backs if they can figure it out and gel together, and of course to maximize their potentials, right? As a duo. Now, this is the weapons tier. This is where you need a running back, you need a receiver, you need a tight end, you kind of need everything. Unless, of course, in here's the the Colts, they don't need a running back. But outside of that, they need receivers, they need tight ends. And you could say that for all these teams, right? The Buffalo Bills don't need a running back, but they need a number one wide receiver. So for these teams, you can go with the Ashton Genties of the world, the Omarion Hamptons of the world, or hey, this is the deepest running back class in the last decade. For a team like the Raiders, they are going to be intrigued. They might take Ashton Genty as early as six, But if they don't, if they go with a Tedero McMillan and then in round two get a running back, they could still walk away with a Quinshon Judkins and a Ted McMillan. The Raiders need talent around their new quarterback in Geno Smith. The Colts, of course, they need a tight end. Tyler Warren fits the mold for them. The Broncos, you need a running back in this Sean Payton offense next to Audric Estime, who is going in the year number 2. And like I mentioned before, the Bills, they needed a number 1 on the outside. They tried it with Amari Cooper, didn't really work, but we talked about it this offseason. Don't get complacent. Don't let Josh Allen have to be Superman on a nightly basis, though he can. Let's make his job a little bit easier, getting that number 1 boundary wide receiver. Amir, your thoughts on these 4 teams and the talented weapons in this class that could potentially go to them?
Really the Colts, man. In my opinion, the Colts have a really, really solid team. I think Pittman is underrated. Josh Downs is really underrated. It's really on the quarterback, man. Like AR has to really figure it out, learn how to really just play a lot more passive, a lot more controlled. Hopefully, going into year 3 that changes. But we'll kind of see with them and the Raiders. The Raiders are, in my opinion, are in a really weird spot. They brought back in Carroll, brought Carroll back into the league,
yes.
Which I think that was a really good hiring for them. And Geno is solid, but it's like, they really got to figure out where they want to go in their direction. The defense has some pieces. Obviously, you got Crosby and everything, but they should go out, get a receiver, get a running back in the draft, maybe Travion Henderson later in the draft, in my opinion. See if you could possibly, draft a Ted McMillan, but they need more speed, more firepower to really boost his offense up for Geno.
If they do go with Ted McMillan, again, like you mentioned, you can go with a Travion, a Quinshon Judkins, a Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. Yeah. If not, honestly, Amir, a guy that is flying up my personal rankings, and again, I have a different channel for that. I'll link it in the comments. Jaden Higgins, a guy that's like 6'4", 6'5" out of Iowa State. If you haven't watched him, go watch him. He has the potential to be elite, and I think he's going to be in the second, third round range. So if they go Genty, they can go Jaden Higgins, right? They can go maybe a Luther Burden, who's falling down the boards at this point in time. But the Raiders, I think, like you said, they need a quarterback for the future. But as of right now, you also need weapons in that offense. Outside of that, all these teams, again, they're going to probably draft at least one running back for the Raiders and the Broncos' sake. For the Colts and the Bills, be on the lookout. They can trade up. They can get aggressive for some of these talented receiving options in this year's class. Talking about offensive linemen, though, we got to focus on the big boys up front. These are some teams that need offensive tackle. For the Patriots, you still need to protect the, of course, franchise quarterback, hopeful in Drake May. And there's guys like Will Campbell, Armand Membu, Kelvin Banks out of Texas. Some of the top names that could go as early as number 4 for the New England Patriots. Some other teams, again, you got the Jets, Cowboys, Texans, who had their subpar offensive line and got even worse. And then, of course, the Kansas City Chiefs. Got to protect the number 15, Patrick Mahomes. Amir, your thoughts on these guys, these teams? You need to protect your franchise quarterback. And in the case of the Jets, you don't really have a franchise guy yet. Who knows? Maybe Justin Fields could be that guy. But all of these guys are either coming off of injuries or they're young or, hey, their front office has just completely destroyed their offensive line in the Texans' case. Your thoughts on these guys?
If I'm New England, I'm going out and getting Will Campbell. Get a tackle, make Drake May's job easier. We know Vrabel loves to run the football, play action, and make life easier for his quarterback anyway. So really focus on that. They could lean towards getting a receiver too, but I think in that case, that's the number one mistake, these franchises make when we're trying to build around their young quarterback. You saw it last year with CJ. They went ahead, went out, grabbed more weapons, and the O-line has gotten even worse. And so if I'm them and get Will Campbell, don't overthink it.
So I wanted to bring this up because for those that know, there's been a lot of concerns about Will Campbell because about a month ago, he was the consensus number 1 offensive tackle, and a lot of people had him going in the top 5. But since then, and since the combine, where again these NFL teams get all their measurements, Will Campbell had sub 33-inch arms. It's silly, but on paper it's silly, right? But there has never been the tackles with sub 33-inch arms that have been an all-pro in their NFL careers. So I did some further research, looked into some of these pages, and there was a Patriots page that came around, and this is some of the stats that he threw out there. You can have the seventh percentile arm length, 1 percentile wingspan length, and a 13th percent hand size, and go top five as a tackle. So Will Campbell's not only has short hands, short arms, and a short wingspan, he's at the bottom of that. Amir, does that worry you? Because no tackle in NFL history has succeeded with those odds against them. Does that maybe detour you into drafting an Armand Membu, who you might not know a lot about, but he's just an athletic freak and he's flying up boards because he has those athletic tools that Will Campbell doesn't? If you're GM, does that maybe change your way of thinking?
I mean, not necessarily. I'm a believer. I'm not the biggest fan of these pro days and these combines because like you know, these coaches nowadays, these analysts, they indulge too much in analytics and numbers and testing and stuff like that. I see it all the time. I see guys that I personally have played against or played with, get undrafted
Yeah.
and go out, show out, in their pro days or even underperform. They're still ball players. And so, in my opinion, if the film, doesn't lie, if the film is great enough, go ahead and draft them.
Yeah, again, if you could play, you could play. That's kind of my rationale thinking as well. If an inch and a half of, I guess, length in those categories is going to detour you from not drafting a player, you just didn't want to draft him in the first place.
Yeah,
That's
right.
just kind of my way of thinking. We'll fly through this one. Interior offensive lineman, Tua needs to stay upright. Again, hopefully no more injuries in his future. The Ravens, outside of Tyler Linderbaum and Ronnie Stanley on the edge, they were a bottom three offensive line last year, according to PFF. You need to get that. You need to improve that unit because they were a dominant offense with a bad offensive line. So imagine them improving in that aspect. It's going to help an offense that likes to run the football. And then for Seattle, you bring in Sam Darnold. You have some okay weapons on the outside, but no real field stretchers, no burners. You still want to protect your newly paid quarterback in Sam Darnold. Guys like Donovan Jackson, Tyler Booker headline this year's class, and they can be big additions to the teams on your screen. Now, on the defensive side, interior defensive linemen. These are the big boys up front. These are the guys that can have huge impacts and be the captains on your defensive line. We've seen Philly do it for two Super Bowls now, excuse me, where back in 2017, Fletcher Cox led that defensive front. This past year, Jalen Carter, who was a rookie just a few years ago, led that defensive front to pure and utter dominance in the postseason run, of course, eventually en route to winning a Super Bowl. Teams like Jacksonville, teams like the Cardinals, like the Cincinnati Bengals, is it necessarily their biggest need? Probably not, but they're in divisions that are tough, physical, and they need guys that can stop the run in their respective divisions. Mason Graham headlines this year's class. He's probably going to go number 5 to the Jacksonville Jags. If not, though, you have a talented class, man. Derek Harmon, Tyleik Williams are just the strongest defensive tackles in the class, and they're probably going late first to the, I guess, late second in that range. But you also have Kenneth Grant. He's, of course, the national champion with Mason Graham. Walter Nolan, Amir, I don't know if you've heard me say this. He's my favorite player in this class. I think he's a steal. I think he's a superstar. And I'm excited to see where he goes on this board. But these teams need defensive front help. Amir, as a cornerback, I want to ask you this because I want to get your perspective. How important is the defensive line, and especially the interior defensive line? How much easier does that make your job on the outside?
It helps so much, man. And my biggest pet peeve is when we're facing a high-powered offense. But that has a great quarterback, but the D line can't stop the run or get to the QB.
Yeah.
It's frustrating because the QB's padding back there. Has all day. It messes up our rhythm and just improves his rhythm. And a team that specifically needs an interior D lineman is the Bears. I'm not going to bring up Jacksonville or Arizona because they need a lot more. But the Bears, the second half stretch of the season, I mean, they got exposed by the run game really, really bad, and it shut the whole entire defense down. The Bears went from being a top 10 to top 5 defense that first half of the year. Once they couldn't stop the run, all that was messed up. So they got to really target somebody in this draft.
Yeah, again, a lot of talented defensive interior linemen. Excited to see where some of these guys end up. Now for the front seven, right? Whether if you need an edge rusher, you need a linebacker, there's a lot of these guys where whether they come in as one position, they easily or quickly transition to the other. So that's why I kind of wanted to combine the front seven, just the guys that can get after the passer, but if they're athletic enough, they can also back up in coverage and again be effective in that regard. Note on your screen now, they're all NFC teams. You have teams as early in the draft as number 8 with the Panthers, all the way to the Eagles, who are trying to replace Milton Williams and Josh Sweat there in their front seven at pick 32. So you have a wide range of teams here. Some teams that just need talent, some teams that just need some fine tuning. But some of the guys that I like in this year's class, you have Mike Green, who has been an athletic freak. He has some questions off the field. Got to figure those out with his case there. But if he can figure it out, he's going to be a top 20 pick. Outside of that, man, it's a talented class on both sides. On the edge rushers, I'm not even including guys like Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, and again, a guy like Mykel Williams out of Georgia. For the linebackers, there's a lot of guys here, man. Amir, the best guy in this class, no doubt, for linebackers is Jihad Campbell. But the reason why I had the Bears, we'll go back to them. The reason why I had the Bears not getting interior defensive linemen, because I think they have some solid young pieces, but to get an opposite edge rusher of Montez Sweat, I think, again, for that same argument with the Browns, it's going to make his job and the rookie's job a lot easier because they're going to have a lot of one-on-one matchups. They're not going to be double and triple teamed and chip blocked almost every single play. If you're the Bears GM, Amir, I guess I'll ask you this. Would you still go interior or would you adjust the outside for the simple fact that, hey, these edge rushers in a division with Jared Goff, with J.J. McCarthy, it can make their job a lot harder if you have those guys on the edge that are constantly collapsing the pocket.
Yeah, that definitely wouldn't be a bad idea. My biggest concern is stopping the run. I mean, you can play against Detroit twice a year. Playing against Minnesota twice a year. Minnesota just went ahead, right? Green Bay too. I mean, Minnesota went ahead and just boosted up their entire offensive line. For a fact Detroit has arguably the best offensive line in football. And so, for me, my biggest concern is that run game. And getting an opposite edge rusher would be great, but you can always sort of schematically either send more pressure, run stunts to somewhat. Be able to get pressure, but stopping a run, really comes from having that talent inside. So I lean towards inside, but honestly, I mean, getting an edge rusher also wouldn't be a bad idea. I mean, Montez Sweat was getting hounded all this past year, getting double team, triple team. Team sliding protection towards him. And, you kind of saw last year when he got traded, to the Bears. I want to say the second he got traded, I think the Bears boosted up to a top 5 defense instantly. Yeah. He had an immediate impact. They were leading the league in turnovers, in that stretch. Simply because of him. Teams had a whole year to sort of adjust to that and really send more doubles. And so getting an edge rusher honestly wouldn't be a bad idea either.
Yeah, makes everybody's job a little bit easier. And all these teams could use whether they need that linebacker in Jihad Campbell that can do everything or if they just need a pure edge rusher. But again, don't be shocked. It really just depends on what these teams' philosophy are because a guy like Jalen Walker could fit in Carolina, but he might not fit with Philly. And again, it's just how these defensive, I guess, minds on these organizations look at these guys. But out of all these teams, I'll say this before we move on. Atlanta, out of all teams, needs an edge rusher. They were bottom 2 in sacks last year, and for a team that has the offense to compete with anybody, you need to start putting some pressure on these quarterbacks in this division. For cornerbacks, really just defensive backs in general, you have teams like the Niners who lost Charvarius Ward. You have the Bucks who have one good cornerback. Outside of that, Zay McCollum is about as easy pickings as you can imagine as teams really picked on him at the latter part of the season. The Chargers are here with an asterisk. They need front 7 help as well, but they're here because Asante Samuel is still a free agent. And as of right now, if they haven't brought him back yet, it kind of looks like he's just going to move on and find a team like Buffalo to go play for, that's where the rumors are. Huge addition for Buffalo if that's the case. So the Chargers, they need a number 1 cornerback desperately. For the Rams, you have a good secondary as far as your safeties, but as far as cornerbacks, you could use some work there. So getting a guy like Will Johnson down the board or Jahdae Barron, my favorite corner in BMO in the class, Benjamin Morrison, that could desperately help that back end of that defense because the offense, again, is there. They can compete with anybody. And for Minnesota, you have some solid pieces like Byron Murphy on the corner, and you have, of course, Harrison Smith on the back end. But you need to add to this, I guess, veteran defensive backfield. So, Amir, as a cornerback, have you watched the tape on any of these guys yet this year? If so, who's your favorite before we get into these teams?
Yeah, so my two favorites, Will Johnson and Ben Morrison, and also Starks as well. And so,
Yeah.
my favorite is Will Johnson. I'm not letting the 40 time and the rumors and stuff about him, projecting to run like a 4.5 40 really get in the way. He's a perfect example of somebody, who I just brought up Will Campbell for example. He's a perfect example of somebody where you watch the tape and all the timing and stuff and the testing goes out the window. He's been starting at Michigan for 3 years, which is definitely huge. Having that experience. But, when I watch him, I hate going with the cliche comparisons and the basic comparisons. But when I watch them, I see past their tan.
Yeah.
Long frame, great size, and they just play smooth. Like me as a corner, and and also playing safety. When I watch him, he makes the game just look so much easier. His technique is perfect. He doesn't have any major flaws. Outside of him, not being super athletic. And for
Yeah.
Ben Morrison is going to be a great DB.
Yeah.
I think that they're projecting him to run a 4.3 40. Great size, great length, ball skills. Amazing, and he's physical too. And Malachi Starks, he's a guy as well. He ran an underwhelming 40, but he's a guy who literally can do anything. You could put him in the slot and the outside, throw him back at safety. He'll be perfect for a team like the Niners or the Vikings.
Yeah, I mean, BMO coming off of a bit of an injury there, which cut his season short. But again, like you mentioned, he has all the physical tools. Malachi Starks had a bit of a down statistical year, still had 90 tackles and a couple interceptions. So take that for what all these analysts and I guess experts are saying. Down year for Malachi Starks statistically, and that's kind of turning off these scouts. Outside of that, Will Johnson, I don't understand it. I mean, I get that he's not testing, and I get that he's had some injury concerns. But this is a guy that if he tested at one of those, right? If he tests at his pro day, he's going to be a bona fide top 10 pick in his draft, like he was projected to be all off season. He's that talented. And like you mentioned, he has the potential to single handedly turn around a defensive backfield because he's that talented and that dominant. It's going to make everybody else's job super easy, especially if he ends up in San Francisco, right? It's a plug and play day one. He's your lockdown number one guy.
Yep.
Outside of that, I mean, this safety class, Amir, is crazy. Nick Eamon-Worry out of South Carolina. He's DK Metcalf, but as a corner. Just imagine DK Metcalf, his build. That's Nick Eamon-Worry. Kevin Winston is the smartest player in this class. And get this, Amir. He had no missed tackles in his entire 3-year starter career for Penn State. He had one missed tackle. So a guy that is a sure tackler, and he could fit pretty much anywhere with that on his resume. And the X-Man, Xavier Watts, maybe my favorite safety in the class. I'm excited to see where he can go. But actually, let's go back to this before we get out of here. Um, Knowing what we know as of right now, with Tampa Bay needing really another cornerback in the mix, San Francisco, you lost really your only corner. The Chargers, same thing. You don't have a cornerback. And for teams like Minnesota and the Rams, it's really just getting that extra piece that could push your team to Super Bowl status. Is there a team out of these five, Amir, for you that you believe needs the cornerback the absolute most? Like on their draft day, they're not looking at anything else but cornerback. Which team do you think that would be? I guess the most here.
Man, the Bucks need an entire secondary. I mean, the Bucks have been getting exposed in the past game, for the past 2 to 3 years, and we've seen in the past 2 years where it's like, I mean, they get absolutely shredded through the air. With San Fran,
They
I
lost
trust
Hufanga
Salah.
as well.
Right, yeah, exactly, and that was a major loss, But me personally, I trust Salah to really, draw more out of his players. I
That's
mean,
true.
we saw years ago where his team sort of, went through some adversity and some injuries, and he's still, his schematically he still was able to adjust, and so, I trust him to really draw more out of his players. I mean, the only teams I can really see having an absolute shot at winning it all this year, are the Rams and Minnesota. So I will lean towards Minnesota really going out and grabbing somebody as well.
Yeah.
Minnesota is right there, and it's like you want to really do as much as you can to make both sides of the ball as loaded as you can because you're going to throw basically a first year quarterback in there, and it's like it's extremely rare to really be a true contender that first year. I mean, we saw it last year with Jaden Daniels, which is absolutely rare, and Jaden Daniels is extremely talented, so that's a different discussion, but.
Yeah.
They have to really do everything they can to make this team as loaded as possible to make it as easy as possible for JJ.
Last note here, I'll say this. For the Rams, last year, my second favorite player in the class was Cam Kinchins. Tremendous rookie season, really came on second half of the year. If they get Benjamin Morrison and Cam Kinchins, I'm a backup Rams fan. We'll say that going into next year. As much as that might be a bandwagon look, They just have a lot of players that I'm excited to root for. Amir, any last thoughts about the draft season? Because next week we're gonna have to do something fun in the middle of this draft season.
Not really, man. The biggest thing, I hope the Browns don't become poverty again. They probably will, but I mean, at this point,
Got a better
I'm really
chance of
just
winning the
rooting.
lottery.
Yeah, I mean, seriously. I mean, like at this point, I don't even know what to do. And the Cavs, lost four straight. I mean, they're back on track now, winning their last two games. But I mean, as a Cleveland fan, we can't catch a break.
No, I mean, hopefully. Well, again, the baseball team, the Guardians, they got a lot worse this offseason because we got one of the cheapest owners in Major League Baseball. So,
Yeah,
the Cleveland fan,
doesn't want to pay anybody.
no, I mean,
It's like the Bengals.
I think we're like bottom two in the league in payroll. So, this entire year as a Cleveland fan, it's going to be just about on par because unless the Cavaliers save it, we're going to be the same miserable Cleveland fans.